crack into things. So, hello everyone, nice to see you again. My name's Sylvie Thrush Marsh. I'm the Head of Platinum Services for MyHR. Many of you will know me from previous webinars because we run this series about once a month. And I, for one, am very glad to not be talking about COVID-19 or vaccines for the moment. So thank you for joining me for a different session and a different topic today. We have attendees here in the webinar. We're up to 83, so thank you all so much for making the time. And we're also streaming live to Facebook, so if you're attending remotely from Facebook, you'll have access to the live stream as well. A bit of housekeeping before we kick off. So the video and recording will be available afterwards to view. So if you're having issues with the sound, or if you need to duck out to pick up a phone call, you will be able to access the recording later on. Of course, what that does mean is that any questions or discussion that we have today will be publicly accessible later. So if you'd like to ask a question but want it kept anonymous, either submit a question through the Q&A function as an anonymous question, or at the top of the question say, please keep this anonymous, and then I'll do my best to scrub any identifying details from the message. So that's all cool. Last piece of housekeeping, of course, before we kick off, is we're still in a pandemic in Auckland and in parts of the Waikato. We're still locked down. And if you are feeling anxious or upset or more irritable than normal or having trouble sleeping, unfortunately, it's perfectly normal. But the good news is it's perfectly normal. So if you do need to reach out for some help to talk to someone, that might be a loved one or a family member or your boss. You can also call the government's 24/7 free counselling support line on 1737. You can text or call that number any time of the day or night to speak to a trained counsellor. So if you're feeling a bit rubbish or a bit rough this week, you're not alone. Plenty of us are in the same storm with you, but please do reach out and get some help because there is support available out there. So we're going to be trying something a bit different today. So those of you who are longtime fans and followers of the MyHR webinars will know that usually it's me having a bit of a corridor with the screen and having a discussion without any kind of supporting materials. What we thought we would do today is share a presentation because some of what we're talking about is a bit specific. I would love to get your feedback on whether the slides and presentation is helpful because if people kind of like the format, we can keep doing it and we can mix it up with the normal kind of Sylvie on a podium kind of diatribe if that's more what the vibe is. So what I'll do is share my screen and get that up and happening, and then from there we can kick into content. So don't mind me as I manage just the technical swap around of sharing my screen in this format. Oh, just tracking down my PowerPoint to make sure that I can share it. Bear with me. Awesome. Cool. So I'm hoping that has come through for everyone. What you should be seeing is the opening to a presentation, and I'll just jump into presentation mode and have a bit of a chat. As we go through, what you are welcome to do is to pop in questions as we go along. As per usual, I'll collate all questions at the end of the session. So I'm hoping to spend kind of 20 to 25 minutes on slides and content today, and then jump into questions later on so that we can bounce ideas back and forth and have a bit of a discussion. We should all be wrapped up by 3 p.m. But again, if you do need to duck off or can only attend for part of the conversation today, you will be able to access the recording later on. So let's get started and start moving through content. So, of course, what we're talking about today is onboarding remotely. Many of us in the professional services industries have been locked down for a period of time now, certainly in Auckland and the upper part of the North Island, and it's really challenging. Life goes on, right? We are still operating, we are still hiring people, we are still trying to bring new people into our business. The world stops for no pandemic, and so onboarding and bringing new people into our teams is a key challenge for managers and business leaders because so many of the tools that we normally have at our disposal to deliver a good onboarding experience, we don't have by nature of working remotely. This holds sometimes in a non-pandemic context. So if you've got an office in a different part of the country, or if you've got people who are overseas and working for you, you might already be pretty up to speed with the dynamics and kind of pace of remote onboarding. But for those of us who've never had to operate across multiple sites or in multiple different countries, this is certainly a new experience for us. So we'll be covering off a few things today. Firstly, we'll talk about onboarding, what it is and why it's important. We'll then go to good onboarding kind of generally and look at some of the key principles there. From there, we'll go to talking about onboarding remotely and why it's a bit of a challenge. We'll then talk about what to do with some really key practices you can put in place to make sure your onboarding experience for your new hires goes smoothly. And like I said, we'll then open up to questions, and I'm hoping that part of a lot of this discussion comes from that conversation. So good onboarding fundamentally is about building trust between you and your new hire. So you need to trust that they will do their job, not be a dickhead, show up on time, take the initiative, and otherwise be a productive and helpful and important member of the team. So there's some trust that they're earning from you. From the employer or manager side, we are earning the trust of our new hire by showing them that we've got their back, we pay them on time, that they will be a trusted and respected member of the team, and that there will be clear expectations about performance and what they will be expected to do, I should say. So trust often gets left behind in the onboarding conversation. It tends to be about the mechanics of getting them all their safety equipment and getting them the laptop and getting them the tools and getting them set up and getting their site access cards and so on. But the overlay of all of that, the common denominator, is that your employee needs to trust that you are a good employer and will do the right thing. At the same time as that, earning your trust to show that they're a good employee who will be doing the right thing. So some of the really obvious kind of onboarding steps that you'd be surprised how often get missed that are key to building trust include getting paid correctly and on time, having the right tools to do the job, whether that's the systems if they work in a kind of office-based environment, or whether it's having the company vehicle kind of arrive on time for them to drive to site for the first time. Making sure that there are clear expectations of performance, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. Making sure that there is effective communication between yourself as the manager or owner and the employee and whoever else in your world they need to be talking to. And overall delivering a feeling that the employee knows that their manager and the team have got their back. That's really important. These are usually what we call hygiene factors. Having them there doesn't feel like a real exciting, sexy onboarding experience. But if they're missing, it's a terrible onboarding experience. I don't know if any of you have ever started a job where you didn't get paid correctly or you didn't get paid on time. It sets the tone really, really poorly at the start of the relationship. And to a lesser extent, so does not knowing what's expected of you or not being able to get a hold of your manager when you need to. So things that will affect the trust between you in a negative way or that don't contribute to building trust include things like getting paid incorrectly or late, like I've just spoken on, not being able to do your job because your tools or your system access is late, not being really sure what success looks like or what your boss is looking for from you in a situation, having to navigate confusing or unclear communication, or feeling like your manager and team kind of aren't on your side or don't have your back. If these things are missing, no amount of welcome gifts or, tasty hampers of things to welcome them, no bouquets of flowers, no pizza parties on a Friday, is really going to be able to account for these missing hygiene factors. So these are the critical things to get right. And they do contribute towards that relationship of building trust with your employee. So the good news is that whether you're onboarding someone who's in your business and you can see them on the day-to-day, or whether you're onboarding someone who's remote, the principles of good onboarding remain the same. You are still trying to build trust with them to show that you're a good employer and not a terrible employer. You are still developing a relationship with them to understand what they're going to need to be successful in their role. You are still getting their systems and access and gear sorted and set up with them. And you're still connecting them with the critical people in the business that they need to be in contact with to do their role, whether that's being in contact with the sales team or the office team or technical, or being connected to important suppliers. But establishing those relationships is obviously key to a successful onboarding experience. So the tools that we have in this context are more limited. So because we're not onboarding face-to-face, we don't have water cooler chats. There needs to be a really high level of trust involved, because it would be easy for someone new who doesn't know you and doesn't know the team to kind of skive off and not really be contributing. And likewise, they need to trust that you will be there for them when they need help settling into their new role and their new work. So the most obvious thing is that face-to-face contact and physical kind of time in the same space is limited, which is where a lot of the tools that we'll talk about later will cover off in terms of what you can do there. But the main thing is that you are limited to kind of texts, emails, calls, an internal messaging system, and sort of video chatting. I don't know about you, I find it really hard to build new friends using only those tools, let alone an employment relationship. So the fact that it's hard isn't a surprise or uncommon. We just have to be quite intentional and quite deliberate about the way that we compensate for and navigate around those restrictions. So the risk of onboarding someone poorly in any context are sort of the same, but the chances of doing it poorly remotely are higher, because we don't have that interpersonal connection with someone that you can build in person. It's harder to pick up on kind of body language, and you can't just swing by their desk to see how they're going. So these outcomes are not unique to onboarding people remotely, but certainly they are harder to get right when you are doing it without being able to deal with someone face to face. So they should go without saying, but we'll cover them off anyway. If your employee doesn't have the tools and the quick access to solve any gaps that they have, they will be poorly supported and won't be able to produce and kind of get up to speed with their role and their team as fast as they need. That then results, of course, in poorer customer satisfaction. That's really hard to out-navigate. And it means that they are more likely to feel isolated and to not trust that they will be supported and helped when they need it, which is critical. Not being able to know who to ask for help, not only affects the trust in the relationship, but also means that they won't be able to solve problems as quickly. So if you are expecting your employee to kind of pick up sticks and move things quickly and show initiative, if they kind of don't have anywhere to do that, it's really hard for them to take ownership of their work and ownership of what needs to be done. And ultimately, an employee who has a poor induction outcome, long-term has, as a business, you've missed the opportunity to build trust early with that person. So they're going to be kind of lower trust and lower engaged over time, and there's good research to support that. Or they might just decide to throw in the towel and bail. If they have a boss who they don't feel cares about them, if they can't actually do any of the work that they're asked to because they can't get the resources or get the systems that they need, if they don't really feel that connected to the business and they don't have any mates that they've made, I would look at leaving. That's a really easy choice for someone to make who doesn't feel really brought into the fold. So the potential outcomes for onboarding badly are common. It's just harder to get it right when we're doing it remotely because we don't have the warm fuzzies that interpersonal connection can deliver to us. So the obvious question, having laid out a bit of the problem, is what do we do? How do we manage this dynamic between us and our new hires? The good news is that 20% of the effort here will address 80% of the issues that come up from not being able to have person-to-person contact or not being able to spend time in the office. So the really, really key pieces that we've found helpful, as an example, MyHR has onboarded I think we're up to 8 people remotely now, which includes 2 in Australia and 6 locally, including someone in my team who started last week. So we've been navigating this world as much as our clients have been, which means that not only do we get it, but we know that there are some easy solutions that you can put in place to address some of these difficulties. So assuming that you've got all of the compliance stuff right, which is a big assumption, but it's not a value add topic to cover, so I figure it wouldn't make sense to go through it here. But briefly, that includes things like having a signed employment agreement with a job description in place before they start, having collected their pay and KiwiSaver and tax information early and got them loaded into payroll, having sent them an email or a text a few days before they start to say, hey, looking forward to having you join the team, here's what to expect on day one, and making sure that all of their tools and systems and gear is set up and ready for them the day that they start. Here are the things to think about that will make this an easier and more straightforward process for your onboarding employee, because if everything you can do to smooth their path into becoming an amazing member of the team means that you will build more trust with them, they will be more productive, and long term they will be a more effective person who's delivering on results quicker. So the first piece is clear and documented expectations. What I mean by that is there was some really interesting research that came out of the UK actually in the last couple of months looking at the impact of remote learning on student outcomes. We learn worse, probably unsurprisingly, when we are learning in a mediated context like a phone call or a Zoom or a video session. So even if verbally you have said to your new employee, here's what we expect by the end of day tomorrow, I want you to have reviewed these 2 projects that we're working on, and I want your suggestions for ways to improve and take ownership going forward. Follow that up with an email. Make sure it is written down. It can be in Slack or in Yammer, depending on what system you use. Make sure that it is documented, because on top of the complete information overload that starting a new job brings, your employee is also navigating a less effective medium for learning. So make it as easy as possible. Have those expectations documented so that if they need to, jump back and remember, they have it in writing rather than struggling in their first few days and feeling like they're floundering. So clear documented expectations to start with and ongoing. Regular calls between the manager or person supporting them and the new hire for us have been an incredibly helpful tool. And what I mean by that is depending on the level of person you hire, that might be a call which is as regular as once an hour to say, on every hour, Sylvie, my new person, I'm going to call you for 5 minutes to make sure that you're tracking okay, to answer any questions you came up against in the previous hour. So you have a chance to ask me questions and make sure we can keep things moving. And that does a few things. So the first is it builds trust that their manager will be there for them because they're calling in and making sure those calls happen. The second is the manager then has far fewer interruptions over the course of their day because they have a regular check-in scheduled. And look, once an hour might be overkill, it might be twice a day, it could be once every morning at 10 a.m. What's important is that there is a regular check-in that your new employee can rely on so that they know that they have access to get any questions answered kind of when they need to. It's already awkward for people to interrupt their boss or their colleague to ask questions in a face-to-face environment. It's even harder when you can't see them and kind of don't have a read on who they are as a person and whether they're going to react positively. So setting a system in place for regular check-ins we have found has been enormously helpful, and it does solve a couple of problems around expectations as to when help is coming, but also for the manager that they know that they will be interrupted in kind of these chunks rather than having 40 questions thrown at them over the course of the day. The other thing that's really important is having a bit of a session to introduce your new hire to the rest of the team. Depending on how big your business is, this might be, all 25 of you on a Zoom call. If you're a business of hundreds, it might just be the wider department or the wider team. You'll know what makes sense, whatever size of business we're dealing with. And giving everyone a chance to have a chat and say hello is helpful. But if you're anything like the businesses I'm working with and like the MyHR team, because there are often a lot of people on a Zoom call, it helps to have a bit of a structured process for going around and talking to everyone. If you are just to say, here's 30 people on a Zoom call, here's Sylvie, our new employee, and talk and bond. The extroverts that you have will ask a few questions and have a chat, but it doesn't really give everyone a chance to say hello and sort of introduce themselves. So something that we've found has been quite fun. It sounds very cringy, and it kind of is, but in the context it works, is have a bit of an icebreaker. Go around the Zoom call and share your favorite film, or share an interesting fact about yourself, or bring your pet in and kind of hold them up to the camera. Whatever it is to get everyone a chance to speak means you do get a good sense of who the team is that you're working with and having a bit of a conversation. If that feels too kind of HR-y for you, which is totally fine, figure out what does work for your business, but make sure that there is a kind of team-wide introduction to everyone, so that your new starter at least has a sense that there are humans who are friendly and that they're in kind of a safe business. This next one is kind of difficult to quantify, but it's really, really important for new joiners of all kinds, especially people who are working remotely. So if you're a highly structured, highly regulated organization, it's likely that you will have pretty thorough or pretty comprehensive SOPs, standard operating procedures, which outline exactly how things are to be done. So if you are, in an accounts role and you're reconciling invoices, that's a pretty straightforward process most of the time. Don't at me if you're an accounts person and it's not. This is just an example. But what it means is your new starter can kind of quickly get a sense of what's expected and how to manage the tasks on their plate. Most businesses, though, aren't like that. There are some unspoken practices, whether they're social. For example, we always catch up for a drink on a Friday, and that just kind of happens every week. So they can be social. They can be a bit around managing a particular person in the workplace. Sometimes it's the boss. Sometimes it's someone who's quite particular or a bit difficult about how they like to work. Or it could be something through to a really, really critical email and report that has to go out every week or 2 weeks or month that everyone knows about because it's so important but hasn't been written down. So anything you can do to help your new employee get a sense of and manage to those unspoken expectations or practices will mean that they will pick them up quicker because they kind of have it in front of them. Expecting them to pick up on it sort of by osmosis, just by being in the business, is likely to fail because they aren't in the business. They're in their home office, or they are in a different city, and they don't have the chance to learn through kind of connections with people. So be as explicit and documented as you can with these sorts of unspoken rules, because it will mean they can come up to speed and not mess up and fall afoul of something they weren't aware they needed to be managing. The second to last thing that we've found really helpful is that kind of mammoth Google Meet and Zoom sessions are all very well and good, but actually you need to create the space and the structure for your new employee to have more meaningful conversations with a few people at a time. So just like in, the real world, when we're all in one space in person, you'll run into people in the lunchroom and ask what they're having for lunch. You'll kind of cross paths with people before or after meetings. Those organic, who are you and what's your deal moments do have to be more deliberately kind of designed, given that we are operating remotely. So one option is to kind of set a roster for lunches. So if there are 10 people in the team, one of the things you might consider doing is having sort of 2 people every day of the week have lunch with this new person. And that could be, a 20-minute chat or a 30-minute chat, but those smaller, intimate groups are much more likely to drive kind of meaningful relationship connections than are the bigger ones, which are more about setting a tone and setting a vibe. The smaller ones, of course, do also set a tone and a vibe, but it's easier to ask 2 or 3 people, what's the deal with Sylvie? She never kind of replies to my calls, than in front of your entire business or your entire team to ask those kinds of questions. So smaller lunch catch-ups have been quite a useful tool for managing these sorts of connections. And you might have a different way of managing that, but where you can, deliberately book in time with fewer people for your new employee to get to know them. And the last thing is whether you do kind of a team non-work related drink session. A lot of the particularly smaller businesses I work in do have this as a practice. Of course, in safe and responsible ways. So if you are replicating that currently, invite the new person, of course. If you've let the practice slip by the wayside since we've kind of been operating remotely, if you are in that set of circumstances, kick it up again. Get a Friday drinks going, get everyone to bring a fun cocktail or wear a silly hat or whatever you need to do to add a bit of colour and a bit of fun into it, because we do look for fun at work. We like to think that we are reasonably task focused and are just here to get shit done, but we do absolutely look for kind of the fun moments at work. And if you can build that in more deliberately, I mean, the phrase design some fun into the week, it sounds like an oxymoron because fun isn't always designed or deliberate, but we kind of have no choice. There's not really a way for fun to organically happen when we're all working away from each other or when this person's working remotely. So you have to do a bit of what you would normally not go near and would consider a bit cheesy or a bit cringe, to build the space for that sort of dynamic to happen. Cool. Now, look, we've come to the questions part of this webinar. I was hoping to talk a little bit about why onboarding is important, but I feel like that's been quite a big dump of content from me. So what I thought I would do is throw open to questions about onboarding or about operating and onboarding remotely. I'll check in on the webinar to make sure I've captured everything off here. So put your questions through now, and I'll also jump into our Facebook Live session to make sure I'm capturing any questions that come through there. So let me just jump in and see what's come through, and then we can start our discussion. No question is too silly as well. These webinar sessions really do come alive when there is a lot of audience participation. So if you want to ask it anonymously, you're welcome to. We can keep it on the down low, but please do fire your questions through so that we can have a dynamic kind of engagement about remote onboarding. So I'll jump into Facebook first and just see what has come through there. All right, looks like we have nothing come through Facebook, which is good. I will jump back into the webinar and deal with some questions there. Pam has said, nice work presenting. It's so hard talking to a silent remote team for that long. Thank you, Pam. It's a skill I've honed over many webinars. I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. And Annalise has said, do you recommend appointing a buddy as well as their person's hiring manager? The short answer is probably, but it also depends. So in a business where, or it depends on the problem you're trying to solve, I guess. If the problem you're trying to solve is a person's manager is really busy and so they're going to need more support and more contact from someone to get up to speed, a buddy's a fabulous idea because they are another person that your new starter kind of explicitly has been told to ask questions and to have conversations with. So it just gives them one more escalation point for something that they're not sure about. So in a non-remote world as well as a remote world, that can work really well. The other thing it does do, especially in a remote context, is it gives them a bit of a mate. Like they're called a buddy, they're not called a supervisor, right? It's just someone to kind of help you settle and ask questions. So in most circumstances, yes, having a buddy remotely is a good idea. But if that person's manager is going to be quite close and quite connected to this person, it may not make sense to appoint a buddy straight away, but you certainly can partway through the induction process. So the short answer is probably, but depends a bit on the circumstances. Got a question from Erica. I'm doing a lot of onboarding remotely at the moment. Any tips on how to streamline someone coming on board and getting started? I feel like I'm doing lots of calling back and forth just to get them started, or maybe lots of calls is a good thing. That's a golden question, Erica. Thank you for sending that through. The difficulty with streamlining is it depends a lot on the work that they're doing If you have a senior person coming into the business in a leadership role versus a graduate just starting out, their needs are going to be quite different. So it's hard for me to give kind of general advice because it does depend a bit on kind of where they're coming in and what they're doing. I think my feedback to that point would be that a lot of calls at the moment is a wonderful thing. Knowing that you have someone who is going to contact you and call you and get in touch builds a sense of connection and relationship and care for that person. So at the moment, I would say lots of calls, the benefit of the connection that comes from lots of calls outweighs probably the hassle factor of having to call and get them set up so many times. But some things to look at would be, are you doing enough prep before someone starts to get all their accesses sorted? So for example, if you're spending a lot of time on day one, like trying to get their emails sorted and trying to get their VoIP system set up and trying to make sure that they can get into the shared drive, if that's chewing up your time, I would pull it back and see if you can do that kind of the week before they start. But if it is just them, or another issue that could be coming up is if you don't have good internal processes and good internal SOPs, and so the only way for them to learn how to do something is to talk to a human. Most of the time it will make sense to kind of extract some of that information from sitting in a person's brain, which then can only be shared by that person talking about it, into SOPs and documents. So have a think about whether you could be preparing a manual or preparing SOPs or making it really clear in terms of process. So rather than having to, answer phone calls every 10 minutes, you can give them a handbook or a manual or a set of documents to say, look in here for your answer about how to make contact with this client or where this information is stored. And if you can't find it in here, then you can call me, but you need to be looking in here first. So in some circumstances, you can get some of the busy work done sooner. In some circumstances, you can make explicit kind of info that only lives in someone's head, and that helps streamline things. Beyond that, it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. But my feedback at the moment would be that your new hire probably really appreciates the regular calls and contact. So don't think that you're doing that wrong or doing that poorly. You're accommodating for, or you're countering some of the lack of kind of people contact that this person would be getting as a new starter otherwise. Jessica says, hi Sylvie, thanks for the excellent presentation so far. You're very welcome, Jessica. You can ask a question anytime. We have quite a team of introverts. What are some effective ways to really stimulate conversation between a team like this, especially with two newly onboarded hires since we've gone remote? That's a magic question and a really important one. The big picture sort of response is introverts have different levels of social need to start with. So I'm pretty extroverted. So when I'm working remotely, I have to sing to hit my word count every day. So, I'm properly extroverted. But introverts kind of have lower social needs to start with. So what I might see as kind of low levels of social chat and wouldn't kind of meet my needs to feel connected to my team might be a perfectly acceptable level of connection and contact for introverts. So bearing in mind that there are different kind of levels of need. Beyond that, what I would say is that kind of smaller groups are better for introverts remotely, just as they are in real life. So having kind of scheduled catch-ups with a couple of people at a time for your new hires could be helpful. And then the other piece is, again, just some organized fun. You might want to do there are plenty of online quizzes, for example. So you could set aside 3:30 till 4:30 on a Thursday just to do kind of a team pub quiz and sort of be all in different Zoom meetings and having a quiz and so on. So the structure of those kind of like organized fun activities takes the load off of introverts having to just fill like kind of not dead air but empty space with social stuff. So that would be some examples. But you might also want to ask and just say, hey team, to kind of your existing folks. We have had Sylvie and Jessica start remotely. I want to make sure that they feel kind of welcomed in into the fold. Do you have some ideas for some ways that we could do that better? Because I know that as a team, we're not always super good at just like having kind of free-balling chats about the meaning of life and how to solve all the world's problems. So what could we do to sort of bring them into the fold? And then you'll be getting suggestions from introverts about what they would be comfortable with. So those are some options to consider. And I hear you that there is the extroverts kind of can't carry the momentum if we're not there in person, and if most of the team are introverts to start with. So it's a good dynamic to be thinking about. Peter says, how important is it to have an induction manual for new people coming into the firm? That's a great question. So induction manuals solve the problem of lots of company policies and lots of kind of procedures and internal process to get your head around. So if you're a business without significant internal policies, for example, if you don't have really heavy health and safety requirements, if you don't have kind of complex technical problems that you're trying to solve, if there aren't complex relationships to navigate, having an induction manual might be a bit of overkill in those circumstances, because you kind of don't have the problem of lots of info that needs to be in one place. They can learn it more easily on the job or more easily learning it from someone else. Having said that, if you do have lots of internal processes, if you do have heavy health and safety requirements, then an induction manual can be a really good idea, because it puts it all in one place so the new person knows what to expect. But it also kind of removes it from someone's brain somewhere, or someone's brains in the organization, so that your new starter isn't having to ask a question every 10 minutes, which can be exhausting for the person asking, because you have to keep kind of finding space to ask, but also means that as a manager, you get your time back because you're not being interrupted every time. So an induction manual can be a good idea, depending on the problem that you're trying to solve in your induction process. Gopi says, awesome presentation. Thank you, Gopi. I appreciate it. It sounds a bit like a focus on technical solutions and automation to help with learning and admin, and then allowing people to focus on trust and building relationships would be a good balance. Totally. Whatever you can automate or sort out without requiring kind of people time is more efficient for your business anyway, but especially when you are onboarding remotely and you are relying on kind of extra effort to get that personal touch kind of connecty vibe in place, the more time you can dedicate to that and the less time to kind of systems admin and automation, the easier you will be able to bring someone into the fold sooner, make them feel connected and supported, make them feel like you've got their back, and get them being productive and kind of up to speed and not requiring as much hand-holding sooner. Gopi also asks, it would be great to have time with everyone to catch up and find out how things are going, but I can't scale that with my team's growth. What is a suggestion for how to do this in a scalable but still personal manner, trying to avoid becoming a feedback or survey heavy kind of management style? Yeah, great question. This is an issue that pretty much every business faces as they grow. Solutions to connection, which are scalable, tend to be impersonal, so you lose that personal touch. Systems which are high on personal touch, though, tend not to be scalable because the touch comes from a person kind of aspect. So the most common solutions are to split your business into teams, because then you've got team leaders or supervisors who then have the role of delivering that human touch, good relationships, kind of good feel sort of vibes. And as you get bigger and bigger, then combining that with, an engagement survey is pretty common. You can use Culture Amp. We use Joyous. That's more of a pulse sort of type survey. And combining a certain amount of personal touch with a certain amount of kind of scale and information gathering is important. I guess my hesitation would be, you can't replace human touch connection-y stuff with systems. It's just not possible. It's not how we've evolved. It's not what triggers our oxytocin and kind of good hormones to make us feel like we're building relationships, there will always need to be some component of kind of person-to-person touch and care and vibe. So finding that balance is the million-dollar people question, of course, but there are solutions to combine a scalable approach with a touch-heavy approach out there. So you're welcome to get in touch and we can talk about that further. Emily says, what is a good way to lengthen time for orientation remotely? We are finding the orientations that we normally hold fills out the day in the office, but the same content covered via Zoom, etc., is only about 3 to 4 hours. So we're struggling to fill the extra hours for our new starters. Oh, that's a really good question, Emily. I think I would have a look at your in-person orientation versus your remote orientation and try and diagnose what's missing and whether it is worth replacing it. So in a world where you have a shorter orientation remotely because you physically aren't having to walk them around the site and like show them where all the stationery cupboards are and so on, you probably don't need to like fill or replace that because there's no value in doing so remotely, right? That's not a problem. But if what you're missing from your in-person orientation to your condensed remote orientation is because they aren't having as many kind of ad hoc chats with people, that is definitely something you'd want to replace, and having those smaller, more intimate sessions with particular people in the organization would be kind of my first suggestion there. The other thing you could do is ask some people who have had the in-person orientation recently and ask them what they found most valuable. So, you know, I mean, task-focused people will find tasky kind of stuff most valuable, like showing the systems and seeing the SOPs and getting the learning done. And relationship-oriented people will enjoy the connection and sort of human chat more, which is fine. But I would have a look at and see if there are any themes about what your team found valuable in the in-person orientation, and just make sure that you're kind of ticking off and accommodating for those things when you're doing it remotely. Because if you are, and your new starters are coming on board in a way that's meaningful and gets them up to speed and ticks off the practical need to know things as well as the relationship feeling like they're part of a team things, get them slogging, man. Like start them working sooner and give them more projects to do. It's maybe not quite the answer you were expecting, but certainly if you've managed to effectively and with kind of care condense your one day into half a day, get them doing some other stuff or give them half a day off. They'd be stoked. Like that would be a really lovely experience in your first week, is to get some time back because kind of the onboarding process is condensed. So some suggestions there. If you would like to have a chat about it further, you're welcome to get in touch. But yeah, just see if there's anything actually missing and maybe don't try and fill space for the sake of filling space. Dale says, from my own experience, it is easy to stick with it for a month. Then all of a sudden, you're 3 months in and things aren't going as smooth as you thought, leading to the new hire leaving. Do you have any tips for staying on track with the onboarding process? I do. I have several tips. The main thing that I've seen happen and had kind of discussions about is that there is a huge, oh my God, day one, week one, month one kind of focus on a new person joining the business, as there should be, because they're starting from a knowledge base of like zero. They know nothing about the job and about the team. But as soon as they are like toddling on their own, their manager, who most of the time is really busy and probably a bit overworked and has, you know, 1,000 things that they're juggling, kind of goes, okay, you're not on fire anymore because it's been a month and you kind of get it. And then you move on to all the other things that are on fire. And before you know it, 2 months has passed, you've launched this project, you've rolled out this policy, you've dealt with that person who's going on parental leave, and you turn around and it's been, you know, 3 months since this person's been here, and they've gone from a high contact first day, week, month with you, which is probably what, you know, probably helpful and important, to like falling off a cliff to zero contact for a couple of months. So the easiest approach to solving that problem is building in a bit of a system to manage it. And the easiest thing is doing just 2 weekly catch-ups for the first 3 months, honestly. In some spaces, once a week might be more appropriate if it's quite a full-on learning curve for them. If the learning curve is less steep, you might go to once a week for the first 4 weeks, twice a week for the next 4, and then kind of maybe once in the third month. But whatever meeting cadence you decide on, having time kind of booked and committed to each other means that you as a manager won't forget and kind of get swept up in the thousands of things you're dealing with over here. And this new employee also knows that they're going to get regular committed time from you, and they can kind of see when their next catch-ups are. Beyond that, it does sometimes come down to setting expectations more clearly. So if your employee thought things were going well and then gets some challenging feedback and had no idea that that was coming, when you've only been in the business a month, you kind of don't have the goodwill or the points in the relationship bank to take that feedback as constructively as you need to sometimes. So that clear expectations piece can come into it a bit more. But the easiest way to close the information loop there and diagnose the problem is just to have those exit interview conversations. Have conversations with the people who are leaving quite quickly to understand kind of what's missing, and then make sure that you solve that problem for the next people who are coming through. Annalise says, you mentioned documenting unspoken practices. Can you give some examples of what you mean by these? Yeah, of course, happy to. So an unspoken practice might be that we always privately in our team send a happy birthday message to the person whose birthday it is. So kind of a social example. Another social example might be every Friday from 4 till 5, we catch up and have drinks. It could be kind of an operational rule. So when you send this report to this client about how their digital marketing campaign is going, remember to include a breakdown of cost. And we don't do that for any other client, but for this client we do. And I know that because I've been here 2 years, but nowhere is that written down. It could be like a managing internally kind of issue. Sylvie tends to structure her day by always having meetings in the morning, so from 9 till 12, and then the afternoon is doing work time. So don't expect to get a hold of Sylvie from 9 till 12, but you will be able to get a hold of her in the afternoon, for example. So it's basically just helping anything that would help your new employee navigate kind of the unspoken shit that happens at work, and certainly don't write down like Sylvie's a real asshole, like don't deal with her, she'll stab you in the back and it's all terrible. Like that's not an example of an unwritten rule, but anything they might need to know to operate either with kind of some of the like social rules of a business. No swearing might be one. Like we swear in our world. Anyone who's ever called me on the phone knows that I do. But in your business, swearing might not be okay. And so making that a really explicit rule is helpful because it means that your person doesn't drop the F-bomb and like get, stink eyes from everyone around the table. So anything which might be a social rule, kind of an operational thing, or like a navigating within the business kind of thing, any of those examples in my view would be sort of unspoken practices. And when you're onboarding someone remotely, it's hard to just kind of pick that up on the fly because you're not around people. So documenting them in a remote onboarding context can be really helpful. Cool. That is all the questions that have come through. So thank you, everyone. That was some really lovely questions and some really thoughtful discussion. It's really clear to me that you are thinking carefully about the onboarding experiences for your employees, which is kind of the biggest hurdle, right? That's half the problem, is making sure that you do have in mind to this kind of stuff. This recording, as I mentioned earlier, will be available online afterwards. It'll be on our website and on our YouTube channel, so you can see it there. If you would like to continue the conversation, you're welcome to get in touch. My email address is sylvie@myhr.works. That's Sylvie, SYLVIE E for elephant at myhr.works. You can call us on 0800 694769 anytime, and also share the video recording afterwards and come back and have a chat. So thank you, everyone. So nice to see you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your days and are enjoying a short week wherever you are, and we'll see you at the next session. But until then, take care and we'll see you soon.